Hi, and welcome back to the Blue Screen Brothers. It's been a while, Marius, since we talked about identities.
It has. I don't know when it was. Was it like 2 years ago or
Yes,
something?
something like that. So yeah, but we have done a lot of talking about service principal or enterprise app
Yes.
registrations.
Yeah.
So
And
maybe we should.
secrets and certificates and token configurations and roles and redirect URLs and OpenID Connect grants and all kinds
Yes.
of
So
very
so I think we
interesting
have
things.
we have covered most of it.
Yeah.
So, but we haven't talked that much about managed identities.
No. And of course, the question is, what is the magic behind managed identities in Azure? So let's just do a 30-second recap of app registrations and enterprise apps.
Yeah.
So in that world, you create an app registration. So here I have my magic portal. This is where I configure everything that has to do with redirect URIs. I can add different graph permissions that my app require and consent to them. And I can also add 3 different types of credentials: certificates, client secrets, and federated credentials. But of course, when adding these client secrets, this is something I need to handle. This will expire. That is something we would like to eliminate if we can.
Yeah,
And that's what we're
especially
going
I
to talk
like
about today.
I like the you only get the secret once. It's listen carefully.
Yes.
I will only say this once, and then you will never see it
Exactly.
again. So yeah.
Except it seems a bit counterintuitive that you can go to overview and then back to secrets and it will still be here. But so you can see it multiple times actually. But as long as if you exit, then it's gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is an app registration. This is the technical definition. If you go back to overview and on this managed application in something, then we can click here. Then we go to the enterprise application. This is the instance of our app registration. So this is sort of the non-technical part. Maybe still a bit technical, but this is more on I can configure outbound provisioning and assign my users and more of the like what should I call it? Sort of the identity and access management part of the app, but also this is also the service principle, meaning that if my application works with any of my resources, that could be a user, but it could also be an Azure resource, then this object ID here, this is what we will see will be the actor in this situation. So that means that this is actually what is sort of what we see from an access control perspective. And the magic behind managed identities in Azure is that the app registration is gone. We don't manage the app registration. Microsoft manages that for us. We only see the enterprise app. And that's what we're going to show today.
So then we don't need to think about anything about the secret or certificates or stuff like that.
Yes, that is correct. So and that is the whole point of those types of identities. We can reduce the amount of things we need to worry about, essentially. So let's start with a logic app. So I've created a logic app here just to save some time in the video, but it's empty. So if we go to Logic App Designer, you can see that there's nothing here. So, but what we will do first is to go to Identity. And this pane here is something you will see on a lot of Azure resources. I don't have any numbers or anything, but a lot. And the point is that you have 2 types of identities. You have system-assigned identities and user-assigned identities. So let's take the system-assigned one first. If we click on and click Save, then what will happen now is that we will get this object ID. Microsoft likes these object and then principle in here, but it's the service principle. This is the object ID of the enterprise app. So that means this is now called YouTube 1. Let's go and or into Enter ID and under Enterprise Apps and search for YouTube 1. No results. Okay, but you see there's actually a filter here. Application type equals enterprise applications. If I were to switch this to all applications, voila, then we get something interesting. We find YouTube 1 as an app. And if we look at certificate expiry status, managed by Microsoft.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't need to do anything with that. If we go into the identity, then it looks like a lot of our other identities, but there's not all that much we can do. We cannot adjust this assignment required or anything, because this is not really a resource used to sign into, let's say, a portal, like our magic portal that we had initially. This is not what you would use this app for. This is more of the identity of our Azure resource. And as you can see down here, it actually also has a link to the Azure resource that belongs to this identity, or that this identity belongs to. So if I click it, we should see that I just get back to my Logic app, and I'm here. So what does this mean? And how do we use it? How do we sign in when we don't have a secret to authenticate as? Well, the thing is that since the identity is tied to this resource, then that is the only resource that can use this identity.
So it's a one-time use user identity. It cannot be reused on different resources.
Correct. So this is tied to this Logic app, and if I were to delete it and create a new one named the same thing, that would be a new resource. So if I delete this, my enterprise app will also, or my service principle here, will also be deleted along with the Logic app itself.
Yeah, so it cleans itself up when you delete it.
Yes. So there's one thing that is difficult, I think, with these types of identities, and that is that Microsoft has made it a bit cumbersome to grant permissions to them for the Microsoft Graph. So from this enterprise app here, there's no real way of actually going to permissions and adding graph permissions, because that's what you do on an app registration. So that is sort of the, I would say, annoying part, where that's a bit difficult. But other than that, this is just awesome. So how do we use this now? Well, let's go and create some kind of trigger first, just to have a way of starting the Logic app, and then let's try something. Let's see if we can create some kind of HTTP requests. So we can try this, https:// and of course, you know, in Norway we don't have too much sun, so I didn't worry about the timing, but I'm getting the sun straight into my face at this point. But that's fine. So we will try to get users from the graph. We haven't added any permissions yet, so I'm expecting this to fail.
Yeah.
But let's try to get it. And this is where we will now configure authentication. Because usually we'd have like authorization, bearer, space, and then an access token that we need to somehow get. That is what you would usually do when talking to a REST API. But down here under authentication, and this will be different between each Azure service. So you can use this from a virtual machine. You can use it from an automation account. You can use it from any kind of service. And how you use them will be different. But here we can now select managed identity under authentication. And I can now also choose system assigned managed identity because this has a system assigned identity. And I can now say, not this, but I can say that I'm going to have graph.microsoft.com as my audience. And that is sort of related to how the graph is registered towards Entra. So let's try to run this. So we can now save. And this is where things, come on, get the run button. So if we now run this, we can, wrong place, down here, we will see that it failed. And this was perfectly expected. You can see our trigger is okay, but this is saying forbidden. But let's have a look at what this actually says, this error message here. Well, it just says insufficient privileges to complete the operation. But it probably knows which identity tried to get it. And the reason is, of course, that we haven't granted it any kind of permission at all. So in order to grant a permission to a application, we need to use the Microsoft Graph or do the same thing through PowerShell, which is a bit cumbersome, but it's I'm hoping Microsoft can add or improve upon that at some point, but we'll see when they do that. So what I will do is that I will just do some tenant switching, because what I need is essentially to have a way of authenticating easily to that tenant. Actually, I can show you one way that I always use in at my customers. So I'm now signed into a tenant where I'm a guest. So trying to work with certain customers and using the Graph SDK isn't always all that easy, because you don't have the admin consent option available and things like that. Maybe you only have access to one app. You're an owner of a single app, but nothing else than that. Then what I do is always to use the F12 functionality in my browser. And when I go to Entra and just take one of these requests, such as this one. So this is for the Microsoft Graph. And I take my access token. I copy this one. So now when I open a PowerShell and use the Microsoft Graph, I'm just going to disconnect it first, just in case. I can do this. Connect MG Graph, access token, read host as secure string. So that means that I can actually, rather than going through this connect MG Graph, scopes, application, read, write, all, I don't know what I'm doing, right?
So just paste it in.
Yeah, just paste in the access token from the portal, because now we're actually signed into a session that has the same permissions as my session in the Azure portal. Very useful. And this is where we can now assign this application some permissions. So just to make things easy, I've wrapped that inside a commandlet that is in one of my helper modules that is on PowerShell and Gallery. And I can say user read all, like this. And the Microsoft Graph SDK has some bugs. God, this is horrible from a demo perspective. So now, because it has some access token caching bugs, so there's so much strangeness going on in this module. But now you can see that this has actually been assigned. So what this is essentially a app role assignment on the Microsoft Graph. So if we now go to our YouTube one app, find it here, we can, under permissions, see that this has actually been granted. And this is where the demo will intentionally fail. Because what will happen now is that, at least probably, if we run it, we do have permissions, but it will still fail. And the reason is caching. So this access token that since we run this once, this has now cached the permissions that we had 5 minutes ago when we ran this. Because we ran this at 9:47, and this run at 9:52 will still use the same access token that it got here. And that is just some inside logic app for and how managed identities in Azure works. So when you grant stuff, you cannot expect it to work until in an hour.
Okay. Yeah.
And we can show you that, because this is where we can now just show a user assigned identity and how that will work. Because then we will get a new token because it's a new identity. So I will show that now.
So in logic app, the cache time is 1 hour.
Yes. Or the Entra access token is valid for 1 hour when you get it. So logic app just says that I have a valid token, so let me use that rather than getting a new one.
So you cannot sign in and sign out again if you want to do that. You just have to wait for an hour.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. There's no way of sort of breaking. And if you shut this off and back on, that is actually deleting the identity and recreating a new one. So you will get a new ID. So it doesn't really help you.
Well, then you have to create everything from scratch again and give the permissions, and so. Yeah.
Yes. But for example, adding Azure role assignments, that is different, because then access control happens in Azure. So that means that as long as RBAC in Azure is configured correctly, then the token that this logic app will use does not contain a list of all the resources in Azure that you can manage, right? But the Microsoft Graph works a bit differently. So but let's talk about user assigned, because there's a few caveats when we use system assigned. So system assigned is very useful, but first of all, it's tied to this logic app. Let's go to our resource group, because we have multiple resources. We have a key vault, we have a logic app, and we have an automation account. So what if I want to have both of these using the same identity for some reason? I can do that, but I cannot use system assigned. So let's go to create, and then we find user assigned managed identity and click create. So let's name it something and place it in West Europe. It doesn't matter, there are like regions and everything. You can use that cross region, and that doesn't matter. Let's call it YouTube 2025. Sun is out. Go. Great. So this should only take a second. And when this is created, as you can see, it is already been created. Let's go to the resource. So here we actually have a separate resource named managed identity, We can see the client ID, we can see the principal ID and everything. But there's no client secret or anything anywhere. If we go to our resource group now, you can see that we actually have this managed identity listed here. So let's do one thing first now. Let's take this principal ID, copy it. We can actually also show that under enterprise applications. If we go here now and list, search for, I guess, YouTube, you can see
2025.
This is now here. Yeah.
And that is still managed by Microsoft. So
still managed by Microsoft. So it's just that they sort of added this as a separate resource. So if we do the same thing, we give it user read all. Let's do like this. Let's see if it still complains about this caching stuff. Yeah, same thing. It's mega annoying, and I even need to change tenant because I'm in another tenant. So I can understand that people think things might be some difficulties having or to work with. But yeah, so you can see now this new one is added with the user read all permission. So if we now go to the logic app, so on the resource group, on the logic app, and under identity. So we can actually now go to user assigned and click add. You can see it lists this new identity. We can add it. So this means that now we're actually assigning the identity to the application rather than just saying on or off. And you can even have multiple. So you can have 5 different user assigned identities if you want to. And each
of them can be used on different resources. It's not tied to one resources.
Correct. Yeah. So you could have one for Microsoft Graph. You could have one for Logic App. I don't really see a good reason why you would do that, but you can. So sounds maybe a bit unnecessary, but yeah. So if we now go to our managed identity, we should see associated resources as well. But you can see here that the Logic app is using this identity. So from the identity side, you can also see which resources. So the last thing that we now need to do in our Logic app designer, under the same HTTP request, we can now select another identity. As you can see now, this suddenly lists this user assigned identity as well. Let's save it like this, and let's run. Let's see what happens. And voila, it lists
it's
users.
Successful. Yeah. Perfect.
Suddenly it works. So same permission, and you can see that everything is cached, and it will be the same issue here. If you try to, let's say, add group read all now, then you still need to wait another hour until the cache expires.
New
So it's very useful. And now I can also go to, let's say, my automation account. This is now just empty. If I go down to identity on this one, I can do the same thing. I can go to user assigned, go to add, and add the same identity like this. So now that it has this one, we need the client ID copied. That's this one. So let's go and create the runbook in our automation account. Tests. Let's do PowerShell 7.2. Like this. So there's not too much that we need to do in runbook to use an identity. I have some code that I copied earlier here. Let's just copy this one. So what we need is, and I can go through this quickly. First of all, same thing as with the logic app, we still need to define which resource. Well, we're working with the Microsoft Graph like this. Now we need to provide the client ID. And this could also be up here. And the reason is that we need to tell which of the user-assigned identities is it that we will be using. And it's this one. So it's a bit stupid that it doesn't know that, oh, you only have one identity, one user-assigned identity, then it will use that one by default. No, that's just not how it works, unfortunately. But the last thing that we can do now, let's just name this access token. We can even output it like this, right? Output. So we need a little bit of code here to actually get our access token. So this is more that PowerShell needs some more information to know how to get the access token. So you can see these strange environment variables here. These are sort of containing the magic. So this contains a URL and essentially let's call it a password, but it's like a temporary thing that you will need to provide to that endpoint, which will return the access token for you. And this will, every run, I believe, will have a different header value here. So let's just save and run a test. Hopefully it works on the first try. So we can now wait for this, and while we wait for it, we should now be able to go to our managed identity and see that we now hopefully have two resources.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
Now we have two resources, both using this identity. This takes a little while to start, so we'll just show that we can get an access token and see what we can also see what it contains.
Yeah. Also, I just remember nice thing with managed identities is that on your login logs in Entra, you will actually see that they are being used, so you can monitoring the usage from a login perspective as well. So
yeah, that is true. Yeah. So as you can see now, we got an access token. So let's go to jot.ms, decode it to see that the app is this run is out app, and it has user read all.
Yeah.
So this can now be used towards the Microsoft Graph and for any kind of operation, essentially.
Yeah.
So as long as we just grant it whatever, we can even probably here now also show that if I were to say, let's do group read all to this application. Just give it that permission. Voila. So now it has group read all. If we now were to run this same thing again, we will also here see the same exact thing where it doesn't have group read all. It only has user read all because there's also the same type of caching.
Yeah. So in 58 minutes time, we will see the groups being
so
added.
Now we will just sit here, wait for 58 minutes.
Yeah.
Talking about other stuff, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
So nice. No, we're not going to do that, but
I think this has been a good way of seeing how managed identities actually could give you a better, easier, more secure environment. The only thing is it's annoying to give the permissions.
Yes. So, it is annoying. So if you want to know what did I do here, this short and easy commandlet here. You will find it in, I believe I have it in my good workaround helpers module.
Yeah.
So you can just install module good workaround helpers, and then you will have it there. Or you can even just have a look at what it actually does, and it's not all that much. This is what it does. It creates an app role assignment for Microsoft Graph. So it's not more than that. We can just have a quick look at the access token. We can even maybe see that, well, it doesn't actually seem to be, we didn't actually get a cache this time. So it's not always that that you will be reaching the cache, and that is due to how automation accounts work. So I probably then reached another sort of cluster or something internally in Azure. So there's no guarantee. If I were to run this once more, I might be back to the cache token from 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, so then it will. So it looked like you have gotten the right token, and next time it goes back to the old token.
Yes. I think I've seen the same thing in Logic Apps as well.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. So I think like everything that has to do with permissions and towards the Microsoft Graph, just think that wait an hour and troubleshoot after that, because otherwise you will be troubleshooting something that will fix itself.
So,
cool.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, but then we wrap it up.
Yes, and then in the next episode we will talk about how we can use this cross-tenant.
Oh, that could be nice.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, see you in the next episode then, Marius.
See you.